A Field Guide to Irish Fairy with William Butler Yeats. Merrows, or mermaids, mermen if you like, or people, or fairy people who live under the sea. Not uncommon, they say, in the wilder west coast of Ireland. Fishermen do not like to see them by tradition because they're associated with storms. Now, sometimes Merrows take human lovers. According to William Butler Yeats, near Bantry in the 19th century, there was said to have been a woman covered all over in scales. And this was because it was believed she was descended from such a marriage or a relationship between a mermaid or a merman and a human person. Sometimes Merrows come out of the sea in the west of Ireland, and when they do, they transform themselves into little hornless cows. The mermaid is well known in Irish tradition. For example, there is a 15th century representation of a mermaid on Clonfert Cathedral in County Galway. She displays all the conventional appearance of a mermaid: female, half human, half fish. She has long hair and holds a mirror and a comb. There is little mention of the mermaid in Yeats's collection, though he refers to the female Merrow as beautiful in his introduction, for all their fish tails and the little duck-like scales between their fingers. We may not meet the mermaid, but we do meet the Merrow in two stories presented by Yeats: Florrie Cantillon's Funeral and The Soul Cages. In Florrie Cantillon's Funeral, we see the Merrow come from under the sea to retrieve the bodies of half-human, half-Merrow progeny when they die. In the second story, in Soul Cages, a long friendship between a human and a Merrow is described, and there is an eerie account of a Merrow who likes to collect human souls. In Florrie Cantillon's funeral story, we hear the Merrow or mermen name a mermaid when they say, "Our king would never have commanded his gnawing white-toothed waves to devour the rocky roots of the island cemetery, had not his daughter Derfulla been buried there by her mortal husband." And so here we have an account of Derfulla, who is a mermaid and marries a human man. When she dies, her husband buries her, and her father, the king of the Merrows, causes the sea to inundate the cemetery where she is buried, thus reclaiming her body. Half-human, half-Merrow people descend from such unions and, according to Yeats, display scaly skin. These would include, by reputation in these stories, the Cantillon family, for example, of Ballyhaig. And so we have Florrie Cantillon's funeral and the Merrows returning to claim his body as the offspring of a mermaid-human relationship. We learn little of the nature of the mermaid in this tale, except for the name of one, Derfulla, and that mermaids have relations with humans. We learn a little more of Merrows. Merrows are described as mysterious-looking figures that emerge from the sea. They have, on the one hand, fearful voices with a clear yet hollow tone, and on the other, voices that keen or cry with exquisite sweetness, the notes of which rise and fall. And you can hear all this described in my reading of Florrie Cantillon's Funeral in the resources. Now, we might have hoped for an equally beautiful merman. There is a much more detailed description of the Merrow, or merman, in the second tale, Soul Cages. The merman wears no clothes but has a cocked hat under his arm. This hat is a kind of a magical hood. It works as a sort of a diving hat or a diving bell. And if the cap is stolen, the Merrow cannot again go down under the waves. And human can use this cap as well if they can get a hold of it themselves to go down under the sea. And this diving hood is described as being made out of red feathers. We learn that the male Merrow has green teeth, green hair, pig's eyes and a red nose. He's got a fish's tail, of course, but also legs are described with scales on them and short arms like fins. So, with green teeth, green hair, pig's eyes and a red nose, the male Merrow is obviously no beauty. The undersea home of the Merrow is described in this tale. It is what you might describe as a conventional house with fine column of smoke rising from the chimney, a good kitchen, right well provided with everything, a noble dresser and plenty of pots and pans, with 2 young Merrows cooking. The room is furnished shabbily enough. Not a table or a chair was there in it, nothing but planks and logs of wood to sit on and eat off of. There was, however, a good fire blazing upon the hearth. There is also a cellar, well filled with pipes and kegs, hogsheads and barrels. To all intents and purposes, it is as though the Merrow lives just as humans do, except that they live under the sea. In common with humans, they need to breathe air, and thus the magical hood. Even a human can use this hood to go down under the sea and live as Merrows do. The eerie part of this story is the idea of the Merrow capturing human souls. According to the account of the Merrow in the tale, I've only, when I see a good storm coming on, to set a couple of dozen of these, and then, when the sailors are drowned and the souls get out of them under the water, the poor things are almost perished to death, not being used to the cold. So they make into my pots for shelter, and then I have them snug, and fetch them home and keep them here dry and warm. And is it not well for them, poor souls, to get into such good quarters? And so we might conclude in the tales of the Merrow collected by Yeats that Merrows really are very similar to humans. They mourn their dead, they breathe air, they live in houses, they eat. The only difference is that they live under the sea, and of course their appearance is different. But there are many interactions in these tales between humans and Merrow, and I suppose you could say the proof of this is the extent to which Yeats describes half human, half Merrow descendants coming out of these unions. The next type of fairy we will look at are solitary fairies.